All right, our session was Generational Education and Communication with Sharon Scanlon, our moderator from Lincoln, Jake O'Shaughnessy from Sageview, Hyun Swanson from University of California, and myself, and we discussed the challenges and techniques of educating and communicating different generations. Lots of challenges with these folks, and from write me to email me to text me, from boomers to Generation X to millennials, some have like preferences but lean towards specific formats of delivery. So, not an apples to apples, but rather an apples to oranges to bananas group, all alike in that they're people, employees, participants, or fruit, but will vary in taste. So, who are these generations and what is their approach, or our approach, I should say, to them? Millennials, number one, born in the 80s and 90s, became the largest generation in the labor force in 2016. Typically select the default participation rate and investments in your plan. But how do we get them engaged? Because this is a tough crew, and we all agree on that, I do believe. And so many methods make them tick or are of interest. They dig the investment topic, which should be the focus for the employers, and they value SRI, social responsible investing, and have an interest in independent financial advice. Gen X, that's me, born in the 60s and 70s. We're in the prime earnings portion of our career. Some plan sponsor ideas to do's with this group is focus on getting saving rates higher and show impact. And that's going to include making increasing savings easier and providing resources on how to manage income. Also providing education tools for debt and student loan repayment. So some options there. Boomers, born before the mid-1960s, these folks are approaching or are in retirement, and some things that employers or plan sponsors can do: provide them with information and coaching, help access adequate retirement savings and income distribution, approach them using multiple channels because they use them all. Jake mentioned it yesterday, and that was they have iPads, so they text message, and they email too, so they actually, it's not just print mail. Some preference information, quickly, 2 takeaways from this slide is all generations prefer various methods, but millennials, boomers seem to want slightly more of all channels than Gen X. So in Missouri, this is our case study, we like to survey our own employees because we feel that they might be just a tad different than the rest of the world sometimes. So what do they want? What's their financial literacy level? For example, text message is over 30% preference with the millennials, while email's high among boomers. So our survey results are driving these marketing efforts. 15% of millennials are not saving, while 37% of Gen X don't even know how much money they need to live comfortably in retirement, just as an example. Our methods of delivery for all age groups, we have found that of the methods of delivery, we've found that simplification is important amongst all those folks. And we've done so in the length of reduction of publications, enrollment postcards, and newsletters. We target using a favorite target medium. We use age-based email and videos on a quarterly basis, amateur in-house video, and we use our own employees and our own pets. Those are me and Brooke's puppies. And so no need to hire actors. Got that taken care of. At the University of California, they've determined that, like many organizations, millennials are a tough sell and difficult to hold attention, and websites and tools deserve a fresh new look. They have redesigned their website, providing retirement reviews that include pension and voluntary savings expressed in dollars and as a % of current pay, and in an effort to make that more appealing to that cohort. So fresh, it's good to freshen up every once in a while. They also have made messaging and benefit resources a one-stop shop for employees via their redesigned website with benefits such as retirement, health, and financial education resource. The site contains 3 important actions. One on choosing the mandatory retirement benefit, then a prompt to consolidate plans, then a consider saving more prompt, which is really cool. And there are also numerous resources beginning with the prompt I want to, and then a must-read list with related courses, videos, and tools. So what did the audience tell us yesterday via a few polling questions? 44% have sent generationally targeted retirement savings in the last year, communications I should say, and 46% send to different age cohorts. Hard copy mailers and email, the most prevalent type of communication, and 55% say their employees can elect the manner in which they receive communication. And no surprise, millennials are the most difficult call to action group at 55%. I made it. All right, on tomorrow.
All right, here we go. Thank you. On behalf of my colleagues Bonnie Sene, Francois Etienne, and Nathalie Wallace, I would like to share the key takeaways during our panel, which was Environmental, Social, and Governance Investment Criteria. So there's so much going on in the responsible industry investment space that we need to demystify it. Regulation is coming at a rapid rate. We've moved from a voluntary environment to a statutory environment, and we really just need to focus on what is important, and that is authenticity. Our industry has been long focused on governance risk, but environmental and social issues are just as big risks. Climate change is a widely talked about issue. Insurance companies have been incorporating climate risk for years. We need to start thinking about climate risk in our portfolios. So let's take a look at some demographic shifts. How many people would you think are 60 years of age or older? Look at your choices. Well, if you answered C, you're correct. 435 million are 60 or older. In the year 2050, world population will be 9.6 billion, and 70% of world citizens will live in cities. These demographic shifts will require sustainable cities and communities, and this creates sustainable investment opportunities. Let's look at some environmental issues. How many acres of land would you think are destroyed each year? If you answered B, you're correct. 32 million acres of land are destroyed each year. 14% of water in US pipes is lost due to leakage. So, in sum, by 2050, world population will grow by about 25% and more people will live in cities. Land mass is shrinking and clean water is becoming scarce. This creates an immense opportunity for sustainable investing. In September 2015, at a summit at the United Nations headquarters in New York, 193 heads of state and other leaders adopted unanimously the Sustainable Development Goals. These themes provide investors with sustainable investing opportunities. ESG is not an asset class. It's a general term for investing that considers ESG factors in the fundamental analysis of a company. ESG criteria can be used to assess investment risks and opportunities, as well as align personal values with financial assets. So is ESG just a bund, or is it a long-term trend? Well, let's look at some trends among your plan participants. 82% of your plan participants want their investments to reflect their personal values. 78% of your plan participants believe it is important to make the world a better place, while at the same time growing their personal assets. 74% of your plan participants would like to see more socially responsible investment choices offered in their retirement plan lineup. And last, millennials. 71% of millennials would actually contribute more to their plan, or they would contribute for the first time if they knew that those retirement dollars were advancing social good. Strategies that use ESG analysis have had many names over the years, and they still do, from SRI to sustainable, responsible, and impact investing. They all use ESG criteria at some stage of the investment process, but implementation can vary considerably. Objectives can range from mitigating ESG risks by excluding companies or sectors or countries, or selecting best-in-class companies, to generating and measuring specific social benefits, to influencing a company for long-term performance. But asset managers face multiple challenges when they integrate ESG into the investment philosophy and portfolio construction process. Data limitations, terminology, and measurement are the primary concerns. It's important all players in our industry be part of the conversation, especially portfolio managers. They should be a constant advocate as they ensure ESG research is part of the portfolio construction process. CIOs need to be more vocal. Active fund managers have always considered non-financial considerations an important part of the investment process. ESG factors are an excellent proxy for the long-term decisions that management makes, which ultimately impacts an organization's performance. Consultants can ask questions to help you think through the objectives of the investments. They should support the consideration and evaluation of all material factors, both financial and non-financial. Impact and return are not mutually exclusive. And finally, consultants can help you implement ESG in your retirement program, whether through your investment policy statement, through your manager selection process, in your proxy voting policy, and finally in corporate governance. Thank you.
So our session was on cybersecurity and the emerging threat. I want to give thanks to my fellow panelists, Keith Overly, Peggy Herring, Melanie Culp, and Assunta Vaivola for their help on that. Cybersecurity is a growing threat, and it is a real threat. Keith's provided a lot of statistics for us, including where the penetration is coming from, who's involved in these risks. We also looked at where the commonalities of these breaches were. We looked at where they were financially motivated. The breaches, in many cases, took many months for individuals to discover. The victims typically or in most cases, are small businesses, which is not a surprise because it's typically the weakest link in the security process. And the tactics that are being used by many in of the hackers involve malware breaches. They also involve the misuse of privileged information. What is happening? The FBI has confirmed that retirement plans are being targeted, and Spark itself has seen an increase, not just in taking PII, personally identifiable information, but also now using that data. And why? Well, because that's where all the money is, as Willie Sutton used to say. $7.7 trillion. The criminals know that, and now they're attacking those plans, and it's important for members to know that. And they're attacking the entire chain. Record keepers, plan sponsors, and participants are all part of the security chain, and the hackers are looking at the weakest link within that chain. So we did some audience polling. We did some polling and found that one of the questions was, is it a priority? 80% of the respondents said, yes, it is a priority. We asked the second question of the audience, do you have the right systems in place to prevent this? Over 70% of the folks had said they have in-house expertise. Some of them said that they're not sure. Protecting plan data is not just a record keeper's responsibility, it's also the responsibility of the plan sponsor as well as the plan participant. They all play a role in that process. Spark created to help this communication between the plan sponsor and the provider and the record keeper, 16 objectives. We wanted it to be flexible. We wanted it to be easily understood. We required that it include a third-party attestations from a third-party independent auditors. We also, and these auditors are typically already in there doing these audits. The process was designed to be very simple. Record keeper hires a third-party independent auditor. Auditor uses the 16 categories or control objectives. Auditors then create a report that is then provided to either the consultant or the plan sponsor. It is them that will then grade it. We are also working on the definition of terms. We talked a lot about what is a breach, what is an incident, when does a breach occur versus an account takeover. These are all things that need to be determined. Privacy is another growing interest. We have this conflict of the need to share data, but also the need to protect and keep data private. There is no real definition around that. So protecting participants. We advise participants to check their accounts frequently. Don't respond to phishing. Read your mail notices. These are all things that are important for the individual participants. The takeaways were to ask for help. Don't just rely on cybersecurity insurance. That's not going to cut it for you. And the other takeaways are this is not just an IT issue. Do your due diligence. Utilize the SPARK 16 control objectives. It's not supposed to be the be-all and end-all. It's only supposed to provide you with the beginnings of your process. Another takeaway is evaluate your vendors, all of your vendors. Review anywhere where personally identifiable information is held. Review your contracts with your vendors. Understand what your responsibility is in a cyber breach and what their responsibility is in a cyber breach.
Thank you. I want to thank Polly from Wyoming and Mary from North Carolina and Brian from Arizona for their major contribution to making their panel successful. What we talked about is the important ingredients of the plan investment lineup itself, as well as actual plan design. And with the overall objective being, how do you improve employee general outcomes? So the ideal place to start is to determine what those ideal outcomes should be, and then be able to determine what kinds of things do you need to add to your plan that will drive that behavior for your employees to have an ideal outcome. So they all did a deep dive back when they were looking at their plans and really asked themselves some tough questions. What is our role in the actual outcome of our employees? Are we taking a passive role, or are we really care how this all works out for them? One very common design issue is adding auto enrollment. And you all know that's very successful, but you also all know there are some state law barriers in a lot of places that don't allow you to implement that. So we talked about removing other barriers for making a successful plan, and that includes making your investment lineup a lot simpler so your participants are not stalled. So getting rid of choice overload, Morningstar confusion, style box confusion. Then we looked at the 3 approaches to how you offer your investments. And of course, diversification is never out of style, and there's no pun intended there. So target date funds are a very good approach as well as managed accounts. But in the do-it-yourself area, these are all great, reduce your core options, but ask yourself, do your participants really know what a small cap stock is or a SMID? Or do they even know what capitalization is and how that affects them? And then, of course, we talked about self-directed brokerage accounts, and one famous person once said, if you really have an enemy, give them a self-directed brokerage account and tell them to Google investment options. So we talked about that. Another interesting issue is diversification isn't always a good thing. Sometimes over-diversification is actually counterproductive, and in Wyoming they found that they had an awful lot of participants in multiple target date funds. If 2020 was good, 2030 had to be good too. You might as well be in several. So there's lots of different risks in life. Some are easier to define and some are self-inflicted, but what we really wanted to look at is what are the most important risks that you need to look at in your plans? Most people think it's market risk. Well, the simple answer to market risk is asset allocation. Asset allocation is usually responsible for 90% of a person's success in having a successful portfolio management. Maybe we spend too much time there. The Investment Institute actually did a study between 2000 and 2017 that proved that investors do literally buy high and sell low. So what are the other risks that are inherent in your plan? All of the plan sponsors on our panel looked at the notion that maybe you have a lot more responsibility to look at longevity risk, to look at the cost of the plan, and to really focus in on bad behaviors and asset allocation. Target date fund deep dives. If you're using target date funds for your do-it-for-me option, you have to really understand how that glide path fits your plan demographic, because there's wide swings in it. If you're choosing between passive and active management, are you going about that in a thoughtful process, or are you just providing one active and one passive? Or taking the real easy way out and just adding all index funds and say you have the absolute most inexpensive plan available, which that would result that way. it's a long process to really, and you have to make the determination, do you want to find out all of this demographic information, and is it valuable enough for your plan to do that? Because it could take 2 or 3 years. Brian Moore from Arizona shared with us what it's like to start a plan from scratch. And you may be envious because that sounds like, well, it's a whole lot easier than dealing with undoing all of the things that we had done in the past, but it isn't really yet a very short time frame to do it. Fortunately, he's been a very active committee member as well as a lifelong firefighter, and he's been coming to NAGDCA conferences along with other of his committee members in Arizona to develop this plan, and they learned a lot at NAGDCA. They learned about best practices, and they actually took 2016 legislation in Arizona and created a brand new plan with a startup date of July 1st, 2017 by following those best practices. So our whole panel was really about what can you do to reduce the risks that are inherent in your plan and to help your participants climb the upward movement to a secure, successful retirement.
Thank you. First, I want to thank my panel members, too. We had over 100 years of experience between us. Sherry Grabeau, Jeff Cable, and Mark Kordonsky and I tackled best practices and lessons learned from the private sector defined contribution plans. We talked about adding best practices can help you serve your participants better and increase the positive reputation of your plan. Everyone wants to be a winner, and you want your participants to be excited about saving for retirement in your plan. The standards legally required for ERISA-covered plans are often used as best practices for public sector plans. One reason is that most state law fiduciary rules that apply to governmental plans are very similar to ERISA. What are some of these ERISA standards and why may they serve as best practices? We looked at training on fiduciary status and responsibilities using the ERISA 404C requirements for investment choices, adopting investment policy statements, adopting a claims and appeals procedure, following ERISA communication guidelines, and considering whether using some of the ERISA contract provisions in your vendor agreements might be helpful. You care about adopting best practices because you like to be a winner. You want to win the NAGDCA award, and you want to keep your participants happy. But be careful in formally adopting ERISA standards into your plan documents and communications. Once a standard is formally adopted, you can expose yourself to liability if you fail to meet that standard. What are some of the areas that can cause problems? ERISA claims procedures have very detailed time limits and review levels that may be difficult for public sector plans. Formal adoption of investment-related standards may not be required by state law and can expose you to fiduciary breach claims if you fail then to technically comply. Beneficiary designation rules under state law may actually conflict with ERISA standards. And our panel also looked at current best practices of using white label investment structures. Colorado PARA adopted a white label structure and provided a summary of their experience. Many plan sponsors have gone to this structure because it allows fewer, broader investment options and easier decision-making by participants. It can allow for greater diversification and freedom to change underlying fund managers without having to separately notify participants, and it can result in lower fees. In addition to the Colorado PARA experience, our panel also looked at a migration of a small private sector plan to a new structure. Looking at these new ideas is important because you want to keep your participants happy. A major lesson learned from the private sector is that if you don't keep your participants happy, There are lawyers out there who will try to make them happy by suing your plan. The private sector defined contribution world has been hit by a huge increase in litigation. Litigation is very expensive and risks your plan's good reputation even if you later win in court. The current lawsuits have been focused primarily on investment and record keeper vendor selection and monitoring, particularly related to how often vendors have been vetted through the RFP process and the fees charged by vendors. If you don't remember anything else, go home and next week review your vendor selection and monitoring procedures. Consider whether your record keeper and investment fees are in line with the market. Take a look at your design and consider whether a change, like transitioning to a different investment structure, may help support your participants. Choose any standards you formally adopt for your plan carefully. Consider whether you may want to use them as standards for vendors to incur penalties for poor performance without committing yourself formally or legally to these standards. Plaintiffs' attorneys love to bring breach of fiduciary lawsuits where you fail to meet a standard established under your plan documents. Keep striving for the best for your participants. Use the best practices and lessons learned at NAGDA this week, and remember to stop, recognize, and enjoy the success you will achieve.
So I want to thank our panel, Wendy, Brayton, Carl, and Jonathan, and we had a really fun time talking about holistic retirement, or as the first speaker talked about, living a diverse life. When you think of holistic, you think of all the elements of your health, whether it be physical, financial, emotional, environmental, social, occupational, spiritual, and intellectual. And if you pay attention to all of those, you're going to live a long, full life. One of the things we talked about was looking at the total cost of risk for employee when developing your strategy. So building in health claims, workers' comp claims, disability and absence, so you can target individual areas and help them improve their health. One of the things we found out is that the reason why we have to focus on these things is that people are living a lot longer than they used to. So pensions and your 457 plans, 401as need to go a long way. What is your purpose? So having a purpose is very important in not only while you're in your career, but also in retirement, and being able to define that is something that you want to do. Offer trainings that include all of the elements of the whole person, so you're engaging your employees and you're mitigating their stress and you're helping your overall culture. This is a picture from a painting class that we did. Engaging retirees is huge, because just because you're a retiree doesn't mean that you're no longer affiliated with the entity. So do something fun for your retirees. Do a luncheon, do a dinner. This is a picture from a luncheon. Financial wellness over a lifetime. As we go through different phases in our life, we need to look at different things, and as employees of your city or county, you have an obligation to help them do this. One way to keep your retirees engaged, a fun idea, is a VIP retiree dinner. This is from Monroe County, where they did a retiree dinner for their county employees. Medicare is a huge part of retirement as well. You need about $245,000 over your average retirement in healthcare costs. And so helping people understand the different Medicare parts is important as well. Phased retirement. So the concept of phased retirement is one that you can bring to your retirees, like offering them the ability to come back in a part-time basis to substitute or maybe supplement some income. Using the 4% rule was an area that, just a general concept to determine how much money you need to be spending from your 457 each year. happiness cannot be pursued, it must ensue. One must have a reason to be happy. So that really gets to the core of defining what your purpose is as a retiree and writing that down. So these were some of the things that retirees can do to keep them engaged in having a pet, playing games like bunco, bingo, having social activities. Keeping a structure is very important. So public sector employees, we're fortunate that we do have annuities, but we do need to make sure that we're saving additional amounts, and so we can encourage that through our financial wellness. 47%, the number two things that people fear is running out of money and not saving enough. So providing education is very helpful for that. Here's some stats in terms of what people are fearing in terms of retirement. They are worried that they can't cover their costs. Their fear of not having anything to do. They are fearful of caregiving. And so we talked about, we do a good job of financial education, but we also want to make sure that we are including a more holistic approach to retirement and talking about those other elements as well. I talked about this earlier, but that was the number two comment for employees is they don't want to run out of money. That's the number two concern. Number one is making sure they save enough. And the longer that people delay retirement, it actually adds to your employer costs and actually risks too, because if you have someone maybe in a public safety position, that could incur additional risk.
I feel like I'm on a Food Network challenge here. At least I don't have to prepare any food. So Carol Bogosian, Kelly Hewler, and Michael Finca and I talked about what to do with that retirement nest egg for our session, identifying and solving for retirement income. And we started off talking about what the retirement typically looks like in brochures and maybe in people's dreams. And it's this lovely walk down the beach, and these people actually look fantastic. They look really young for retirees. But the reality for many people is actually quite different than what we see in this picture. For many people, it's not a long vacation, but there's a lot of questions as to, what am I going to do with retirement? And not only, to the prior speaker's comments, what will my retirement look like, but how will I afford it, and how will I spend my money in retirement? So the panel really was focused on identifying this issue and also looking at practical solutions. How do we help people spend money in retirement? And right now, our industry kind of focuses on calculators like the following one, in which there's kind of this smooth drawdown of spending in retirement. And over a 20-year period, the ideal scenario is that at the very day you die, you run out of money. You want to pair those up exactly. But what we find is that that's not really how people behave. People don't anticipate that they're going to be successful in dying on the very day that they run out of money. And we did some quantitative research at EBRI looking at this topic, and we found that regardless of different amount of assets that people had starting in retirement, regardless of whether it was $200,000 or less or greater than $500,000, people were preserving their money in retirement as opposed to spending it down. According to this study from the Health and Retirement Study, 12% to 27% was the amount of money people were spending in retirement, leaving the majority of their nest egg intact over the course of their retirement. So they're preserving assets, and we found, in fact, that a third of retirees were actually growing their assets in retirement. Why are they doing this? So this is where we have to leave our quantitative analysis and go to qualitative analysis, such as this study by a focus group by the Society of Actuaries. And the concerning thing is that people talked a lot about being uncertain and having fear and just not knowing what the markets were going to do or what the future would hold. How long am I going to live? How do I control for all these factors and spend my money in a way that I'm not going to run out? And that's concerning. It's concerning that people are perhaps doing this out of fear. Some even are seeking to grow their money in retirement, as I said, because perhaps they can't make that switch. Their whole life they've gone through the process of growing money and feeling virtuous about it. How do they flip the switch to spending in retirement? Many people express that they are frugal and you just don't have to spend money. Maybe they feel like, oh, I have all my material possessions I need. I can live a simple life and I feel good about that. A lot of people talked about needing versus wanting. I don't need to spend money on things I want. I focus on things I need. I can go the cheap way. Well, so, what is really going on? And I think the big concern here is that we have people that have spent their whole life accumulating money for retirement. They've foregone pleasures during their life. They haven't bought the big house. They haven't bought the cars or whatever. And now they're afraid to spend. And this is only going to get worse as we see increased longevity, reduced access to pension income, and possible catastrophic events. Long-term care came up as a consideration. People want to have that nest egg in case they end up in a retirement home or their spouse does, and they need to spend their money on that. So, these are concerns that, in terms of practical steps for plan sponsors, how do you address this? And it can be things like redesigning your plan in terms of thinking about keeping money in the plan and allowing structures that people can continue to be in the plan, benefit from the existing defined contribution plan, and draw down their money. And we have things like allowing partial and ad hoc withdrawals or offering systematic periodic partial payments as potential solutions there. But there's also education that plan sponsors could engage in, specifically helping people. A big one was drawing down money from Social Security. When should you take Social Security? A lot of people take it too early, and what is the best strategy for that? Also using annuities, a lot of misinformation about annuities and concerns about using annuities. But mainly that's in the retail space. Maybe we can talk more about institutional annuities. And then finally, cognitive define. What happens when people get older and they really can't handle their money in retirement? So clearly there is a lot more work that needs to be done in this area.
Wow, nice work. Thanks to everyone. That was great. I'm impressed. We might have to do that again. I guess that's it for us. So thank you for sticking around, and we'll see you next year in New Orleans, which will be awesome.